The morning sun had barely climbed above the skyline when hundreds of travelers gathered outside one of the busiest airport terminals in America. Business executives hurried with expensive luggage, families laughed while taking photographs, and airport announcements echoed through the bright glass building. Among the crowd stood a quiet single father holding the tiny hand of his 7-year-old daughter, carrying nothing more than 2 worn suitcases and a folder that contained the most important papers of his life. Within the next 20 minutes, he would be publicly humiliated in front of strangers, his daughter would silently wipe away tears she desperately tried to hide, and the people who mocked him would have no idea they were insulting the very man whose signature had once saved one of the world's biggest airlines from financial collapse. Sometimes destiny doesn't arrive dressed in luxury. Sometimes it stands quietly in old shoes, carrying hope instead of pride. Before we continue this unforgettable journey, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us if you believe kindness always finds its way back, share this story with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to Lifeline Tales for more emotional stories that remind us humanity is never out of style. Elias Carter had never imagined life would become so heavy before his 40th birthday. Only 3 years earlier he had been one of the most respected aviation safety engineers in the country, a brilliant specialist whose innovative emergency inspection system prevented dangerous aircraft failures around the world. Airlines rarely mentioned his name publicly because his work happened behind the scenes, but executives knew exactly who he was. His careful handwriting rested beneath hundreds of safety certifications that allowed aircraft to carry millions of passengers. Then tragedy arrived without warning. His wife passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him to raise their daughter, Nora, completely alone. Grief consumed him. Instead of focusing on promotions and recognition, Elias quietly resigned from the demanding consulting firm that required constant travel. He chose his daughter over prestige, believing no success mattered if the little girl waiting at home felt abandoned. The years that followed were cruel. Medical bills emptied his savings. Their comfortable house was sold. Expensive suits disappeared from his closet, replaced by simple shirts purchased from discount stores. Yet every evening he helped Nora with homework, cooked dinner, read bedtime stories, and reminded her that true wealth was measured by love rather than money. She believed every word because her father never stopped smiling in front of her, even on nights when he skipped dinner so she could eat a little more. One bright summer morning, hope finally arrived in the form of an invitation. A regional aviation institute had offered Elias a leadership position overseeing aircraft safety programs. It was the opportunity that could rebuild their lives. The interview was in another state, and the company had already purchased their airline tickets. Nora would accompany him because there was no one else to watch her. She wore her favorite blue dress, braided her hair exactly the way her late mother used to, and proudly carried a tiny backpack with coloring books and a stuffed rabbit that had traveled everywhere with her since infancy. The airport looked enormous through Nora's excited eyes. She had never flown before. Every airplane roaring across the runway made her smile brighter. Elias squeezed her hand gently, silently promising himself that this journey would become the beginning of a better future. They arrived early, organized their documents carefully, and joined the check-in line filled with travelers dressed in expensive clothing. Everything changed the moment they reached the service counter. The airline employee glanced briefly at Elias's worn appearance before looking again at the reservation. Her expression hardened almost instantly. Without verifying the details properly, she assumed something was wrong with the booking. Several impatient passengers standing nearby began complaining about delays. Instead of calmly investigating the issue, another supervisor approached and questioned Elias loudly enough for everyone around them to hear. Curious eyes turned toward the single father. People whispered assumptions before learning a single fact. Some believed he had purchased fake tickets. Others quietly suggested he should move aside until real passengers were served. Nora stood frozen beside her father, clutching his sleeve. She didn't fully understand the situation, but she recognized embarrassment. Children often understand emotions before explanations. She lowered her eyes as strangers stared at them. Elias remained remarkably calm. Years of hardship had taught him that anger rarely solved humiliation. He politely presented additional confirmation emails, identification documents, and official travel authorization from the hiring company. Still, no one seemed interested in listening. The supervisor eventually demanded proof that the electronic authorization attached to the reservation was legitimate. Elias slowly opened the worn leather folder he always carried. Inside rested years of carefully preserved documents, recommendation letters, engineering certifications, and old project records. At the bottom lay a faded technical approval document bearing his unmistakable signature, written years earlier during an emergency fleet inspection that had prevented dozens of aircraft from being grounded. The supervisor barely looked before dismissing it with a careless wave. To him it was simply another piece of paper from another poorly dressed traveler. What happened next stunned everyone. A distinguished man wearing a dark business suit happened to be walking through the terminal surrounded by several executives. He had been touring airport operations before attending an industry conference. As he glanced toward the growing crowd, one familiar signature visible on the open document instantly caught his attention. His footsteps stopped. His expression changed from casual curiosity to complete disbelief. The man quietly walked closer, asked to see the document, and examined the signature with extraordinary care. His eyes widened. Years earlier, during one of the darkest financial crises in the airline's history, a catastrophic safety issue had threatened to ground nearly half the company's fleet. Panic spread through boardrooms as millions of dollars vanished every day. While executives searched desperately for solutions, one independent aviation engineer developed an innovative inspection method that proved most aircraft remained perfectly safe after targeted maintenance rather than complete replacement. That engineer's approval signature had become legendary within aviation circles because it saved thousands of jobs and protected the airline from bankruptcy. Standing before him was the very same engineer. The suited executive introduced himself as Adrian Whitmore, the airline's current chief executive officer. Without hesitation, he extended both hands toward Elias with genuine respect. The entire terminal fell silent. Employees who moments earlier had questioned the father's honesty suddenly realized they had misjudged one of the industry's greatest minds simply because his clothes looked ordinary. Adrian publicly thanked Elias for a contribution that countless employees still benefited from years later. He admitted that many people working at the airline owed their careers to decisions made by this humble engineer whose name had gradually faded from public memory. Cameras from nearby travelers quietly captured the emotional scene as airport staff stood speechless. Yet what touched everyone most was Elias's response. Instead of criticizing those who had embarrassed him, he simply smiled and explained that difficult seasons often changed appearances but never changed character. He gently placed his hand on Nora's shoulder and reminded everyone that children remember how adults treat strangers long after they forget words spoken during stressful moments. His calm dignity carried far greater power than anger ever could. The CEO personally escorted Elias and Nora through priority check-in. He instructed the staff to apologize sincerely, not because company policy demanded it, but because respect should never depend on someone's clothing, wealth, or social status. Several employees fought back tears while apologizing directly to Nora, who quietly nodded with surprising maturity. Inside the departure lounge, Adrian spent nearly an hour speaking privately with Elias. During their conversation he learned the full story of the engineer's sacrifices after losing his wife, leaving an extraordinary career to become a full-time father, and struggling financially despite possessing world-class expertise. Adrian realized the aviation industry had overlooked not only remarkable talent but remarkable integrity. Before boarding began, Adrian made an unexpected phone call. By the time the aircraft landed several hours later, the Aviation Institute hosting Elias's interview had already received glowing recommendations from the airline's CEO himself. They also learned about the extraordinary leadership Elias displayed during public humiliation. The interview became less about technical qualifications and more about values. Everyone already knew his professional achievements were exceptional. What truly impressed the selection committee was hearing how he responded to disrespect with patience, compassion, and quiet strength. They offered him the executive position immediately, complete with flexible scheduling that allowed him to remain present in Nora's life. Months passed. Elias transformed the Institute's safety programs while mentoring young engineers who admired not only his intelligence but also his humility. Nora adjusted beautifully to her new school, where she proudly told classmates her father helped keep airplanes safe. Their small apartment gradually filled with laughter again. Family photographs replaced unpaid bills on the refrigerator door. Hope finally looked stronger than heartbreak. Back at the airport where everything happened, employee training programs were redesigned using the unforgettable incident as a lesson. New staff learned that every traveler carried invisible battles. Expensive clothing revealed nothing about courage. Quiet people often possessed extraordinary histories. Respect should always come before assumptions. The story spread across social media and local news, inspiring millions who had experienced similar moments of unfair judgment. Parents struggling alone found encouragement. Workers who felt forgotten remembered that true worth never disappears simply because life becomes difficult. Kindness once again proved stronger than appearances. If this story has touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and subscribe to Lifeline Tales so together we can continue spreading stories that remind the world compassion still exists.